And Lauren, that's being recorded now, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Greetings, everyone. We're going to allow some time for the participants to populate here. I'm sitting here with Dr. James Keating, the director of the Humanities Program, who's to my left and about to reappear. And once again, we're going to wait until the participants populate, and then we will get started. All right. Well, welcome everyone to the talk that is entitled Fatherhood Begins in the Womb by Ryan Baumberger. Fatherhood Begins in the Womb by Ryan Baumberger, whom we're very happy to have with us. I'm going to introduce Ryan now. Ryan is the husband of Bethany Baumberger and the father of 4 children. And he is the co-founder of the Radiance Foundation. The Radiance Foundation, a national nonprofit organization that advocates that every human life, planned or unplanned, has purpose. Ryan has a BS in marketing from Messiah University and a master's in communications from Regent University. He is an Emmy award-winning international public speaker, columnist, and he is the author of the book, Not Equal, Civil Rights Gone Wrong. Over the last 12 years, Ryan has spoken at nearly 100 colleges. From out of his own personal story, Ryan speaks powerfully and with conviction and seeks what in conversation with me and Dr. Keating just very recently, he called a grace-based approach to the challenging issues of our day. Once again, he said he has a grace-based approach to the challenging issues of our day, something that impressed Dr. Keating and me very much. Ryan, we are very, very glad to welcome you to Providence College. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Absolutely, thank you. It's great to be here. Well, sort of here, virtually here, I guess. It's awesome that we can still connect in this way so that we can learn from each other. And that's what this is all about. Hopefully you'll learn a little bit from me and I can learn something from you as the participant. I love talking about this issue because I am a father. I have 4 awesome kiddos, 2 of whom were adopted. And so I'm really passionate about this issue. I mean, when you talk about family, it's the foundation of any society. We need our mothers and our fathers. In America, we are facing a national crisis. We have a fatherlessness epidemic where 40% of children born in America are born into homes without fathers. And social science proves time and time and time again the crucial nature of intact 2-parent married homes. Children flourish best in that kind of environment, whether you're talking spiritually, materially, emotionally. And so I'm going to dig into that in just a few minutes, but I want to explain to you a little bit about the Radiance Foundation and why we're so passionate about illuminating these issues. In fact, the Radiance Foundation does 3 things. We illuminate, educate, and motivate. We illuminate that every human life has purpose, God-given purpose. We educate people about a myriad of social issues in the context of that purpose. And then we motivate, prayerfully, we motivate because what good is our knowledge? What good is our faith if we don't actually put it into action? And so we started the Radiance Foundation to do these things. And it's not exactly an easy thing to do, to talk about these issues, but we want to equip people to feel confident to engage in culture shifting issues. So we do these multimedia presentations around the world as part of what we do. We also write op-eds in various news outlets on a weekly basis. We create original content. I'm a creative professional, so I love to create stuff to help us engage in conversations, to help trigger conversations. And so you can see it on our website. If you go to radiance.life, it's actually the easiest way to get there. We have tons of memes and graphics and infographics, the fact sheets, because I'm a factivist. I love bringing context and clarity to these issues. And so there are plenty of fact sheets with everything linked. So there's never a question as to any particular statistic or assertion. And we love creating this stuff. We also have a podcast where we can go beyond the soundbite and actually just delve deeply into these issues. And this is my wife, Bethany. We love doing this. In fact, this is our year anniversary. We're having a new show next week. We travel a lot, so it's not always a weekly podcast, but if you go to lifeispurpose.com, you can check out, I think we have about 20 or 21 shows. And we also, within these shows, we give you links to the stuff that we're talking about, to the studies that we're talking about, to the issues we're talking about, so that you can help, shape your informed decision, your mindset when it comes to these issues. So we love talking about these things, but to understand why I guess I'm particularly passionate about the issue of fatherhood is because I initially didn't have a father, at least in the sense that people understand having a father. So I have to give you my little backstory so you can understand why is this guy talking about this issue? Why is he talking about fatherhood? And especially in a culture that tries so hard to redefine what marriage is, redefine who women and men are. Why am I particularly passionate about this? And it has to go to my own brokenness. And it also goes to the brokenness of a number of my siblings. You see, I grew up in a tiny little family of 15. I have 6 brothers, 6 sisters, and we were all adopted and loved, but we came from such incredible brokenness. In fact, many of us would have been written off by the world as, well, they're unplanned, they're going to be unwanted, they're going to be unloved. And yet my parents shattered that myth. But it's amazing the way that some people view other human beings. They think, well, their circumstance defines their worth, but it doesn't. In fact, I'm one of those exceptions. In fact, my family is full of exceptions. And the thing that has made me who I am is I had parents who loved me in all my imperfectness and all of their imperfectness. People have this sort of mentality that life has to be picture perfect. And actually, because life is not picture perfect, it's what makes it so beautiful.
Life is never picture perfect. Human beings come in all different shapes, sizes, colors, and abilities. No matter how much we plan, no matter how much we think we're prepared, the unplanned happens all the time. It's how we respond to the unexpected that shows our true humanity. But many do not see the value of every human life. Too many are willing to discard those who don't fit the picture of perfection. Abortion destroys the chance to love and to be loved. We never know what will fill the frames of our lives or how empty those frames can be when we allow exceptions.
Every life is a gift.
I would say that the majority of those in my family would be those exceptions, those written off by the world. In fact, where the world would say they should have been aborted. Certainly, in my case, many say that I should have been aborted. So here you have my family, and you can see a picture here from an old article, and I love this title, Theirs Is Not an Ordinary Family. Definitely not an ordinary family. 15, grew up in a farmhouse with 1.5 bathrooms. Just let that sink in for a moment. But this family here, as you can see, obviously there's a mixture. There's white and black and Native American and Vietnamese. But this is just such a mixture. Those with disabilities that, didn't fit that picture of perfection, but yet my parents loved us like crazy. In fact, this is the moment that my mom first held me. I was 6 weeks old when I was adopted. And here's the thing about, about family and about parenthood. Anybody who's ever been a parent understands the word sacrifice, but too many don't understand that there's a huge distinction between sacrifice and self-sacrifice. Parents self-sacrifice all the time. And it's a beautiful and difficult thing. My mom and my dad, when they talked about I was the first one adopted. They talked about adopting this brown child, this black child, biracial, putting that in quotes, black and white. She didn't realize the resistance that she was going to get from those that she never even knew were racist. See, people will often ask my parents, well, what inspired you? What influenced you to adopt? And it was two things: love and brokenness. See, my mom at the age of 5 had to be placed in a children's home for 1 year. Her father was an alcoholic, was emotionally abusive, and her parents were separating. So at the age of 5, and it amazes me how much we underestimate little kids, the way that they receive and perceive the world. At the age of 5, her life was so radically changed in that children's home. Even though she had her mom and her dad visit her separately, she noticed that there was another little girl there with physical disabilities, and no one came to show love or compassion to that little girl. No parent came to visit her, and that broke my mom's heart. So that's where the heart for adoption began. And so she just remembers getting down on her knees and just praying to God, help me be a mommy to those who don't have one. And that's where that heart of adoption out of her own brokenness began. And so throughout her life, she tried to still connect with her father, because she knew that he was a broken man, but she just showed love to him throughout her life, even though he continually rejected her. He was involved with the original Baumberger family, the 3 homemade ones, the 3 biologically related kids. So he was connected just from time to time with them. But the moment they talked about adopting me, she realized that all of his brokenness included being a racist too. In fact, he said, if you bring, and I'm going to tame this down a little bit, but if you bring that Black child into your home, you're going to ruin your family. And so my mom literally had to lose a father in order to gain a son. So the moment my parents adopted me, he basically disowned her, had nothing whatsoever to do with our family the rest of our lives. I'll have to say he missed out on 13 amazing grandchildren, and I'm glad that my mom chose well. She chose me. So I am who I am because of that incredible woman. I'm also who I am because of my father. A man of faith, a man of integrity, a man who loved those that other men abandoned. This is my dad, and I've never known anyone quite like him. And this meme kind of sums up what the experience in our family was. Color isn't what binds us. Love is. It's not culture. It's not so many other attributes, but really love is what bound us together as a family. You know, I remember back when Justice Amy Coney Barrett was being confirmed, and some so-called anti-racists were attacking the judge at the time and her husband because they adopted children whose skin color was different than theirs. And so people like Ibram X. Kendi, Boston University professor and New York Times bestseller, accuse them and others like them of colonialism and the savior complex, having a savior complex. Look, my parents didn't have a savior complex. They had a love reflex. This is what parents do. This is the beauty of self-sacrifice. And so when I think about, fatherhood beginning in the womb, I think about how did my dad respond to those situations of the unplanned? He opened his arms and he loved us. He loved us like crazy. For, the lives that would be so easily discarded, he was like, I'll take them. And every year there's like a new flavor added to the family. I mean, you're talking 13 kids, 10 of us adopted, but he loved us unconditionally. He sacrificed for us daily to provide and care for us, just like my mom did. Each of us, for all of our many different reasons, needed both our mom and our dad. Some of us came from horrifically abusive backgrounds, physical abuse and sexual abuse, and we needed the stability and the unique differences that a loving married mother and father would bring. So here, this article, and I love the title of this because the journalist actually got it. I felt like it encapsulated the myth of the unwanted child. It just kind of shattered that whole thing because, as you can see, unwanted children find their wanted. This is pretty much like the DNA of pro-abortion activism, in that no child should be unwanted, and children who are born into difficult circumstances shouldn't have to deal with difficulty or adversity, but yet adversity makes us better human beings. So here, some of us may have been unwanted by a biological parent or parents, but we're all wanted by someone. And so I want to show you just a picture of, whoo, these are all my siblings and my parents. So this is the whole Bomberger group here. You can see we obviously don't look alike. Even the white people in the picture have some afros, but this is just such a mixture. I grew up in diversity. I love diversity. Diversity is powerful and beautiful, but so is commonality. And one of the most powerful things I learned there are many things I learned in my family. One of the most powerful things, and this is actually a foundational tenet to the Radiance Foundation, is this, that we're all one human race. One human race. And if you're coming from a biblical perspective, Acts 17:26, it says, "For one blood God created man." So I grew up in a family where we were not encouraged to be colorblind. I know people mean well when they say we should be a colorblind society. No, we shouldn't. God created color for us to enjoy and to celebrate, but not to separate ourselves by it. And so when people say that, I'm like, no, not colorblind. We should be colorful, but not. We can't think that we can determine or understand or assumes things about somebody simply because of the hue of their skin. And so this is why this is such a powerful lesson I learned. And quite honestly, too, when you talk about racial reconciliation, one of the most powerful forms of racial reconciliation, if you want to put it that way, is bringing a child of a different ethnicity, different color, different melanin into your home and loving him or her simply because they deserve to be loved. That to me is one of the most powerful forms of reconciliation. Now this, I kind of advanced this to, let me go back here. I want to show you a picture that you already just saw, but I want to show you a picture of what unwanted looks like. So when you hear this phrase unwanted child, I don't know what image comes to mind, but this image that I'm going to show you is my entire family. It's my brothers, my sisters, their spouses, their children. There is one little grandma in the middle of the picture, but other than that, no extended family. But this is what happens when you love. This is what happens when you believe that marriage matters. This is what happens when you believe that fathers matter. And so I just want to show you this picture of unwanted. This is my whole family. This is actually 62 strong. It's crazy. I mean, looking at all these people, looking at the result of two parents giving their lives and sacrificing so that purpose could be unleashed in all of our lives. Now, this picture is actually 5 years old. So there are 15 more people added to this picture since it's through marriage, adoption, and new births. And what's really awesome is I have nieces and nephews who also are adoptive parents. So this legacy of love has continued. But see, this picture is possible because of courageous birth moms. Women who chose to be stronger than their circumstances. It's interesting because we have an abortion industry. On one hand, it's always telling women how strong they are and the future is female. But on the other hand, saying you can't face the unplanned. Well, which is it? Are they strong or can they not handle facing this? And of course they can, especially with love and support. And I'm grateful for all these birth moms. I'm grateful for all my siblings. I'm grateful for my birth mom, whom I've never met. I did search for her years ago. And for years as a creative, I always try to figure out, how do I thank my birth mother? What do I even say to her? So I wrote a song called Meant to Be, which is just a tribute to her going through 9 months of a traumatic pregnancy. And then I wanted to create a video where it showed all the things I've been able to become in my life by the grace of God, all these different things, and her singular decision. So we often don't think about singular decisions and the impact that they will have, not just on today, not just tomorrow, not even just next year, but for generations. And though I've never met my birth mom, I'm hoping that maybe through social media or something, she'll see this video. I wrote the lyrics, I sang the lyrics to this. I just hope she will see this and understand my heart of gratitude for how courageous she was, and not only give me the gift of life, but give me the gift of adoption.
You couldn't see what I would be. It wasn't part of your plan. Stronger than your circumstance. You gave my life a chance. Touching
You see, I am the 1% that's used 100% of the time to justify abortion. But the circumstances of our conception don't change the condition of our worth. So I'm grateful to my birth mom. I hope she experienced the healing that she needed. Oftentimes we think that abortion is a natural follow-up to rape, but yet violence does not heal violence. And so one day I hope to meet her face to face, because she enabled me to love and to be loved. In fact, I love being a father. This is my family. They call us the Bombs. We're the Bombergers. And I love all my kiddos. Out of my 4 kiddos, 3 of them were unplanned. All 4 of them were loved like crazy. 2 of my kiddos were adopted. And this is what happens when people choose to be stronger than their circumstances. And my wife was a single mom. My wife, Bethany, the love of my life, the executive director, the one in charge of the Radiance Foundation. She was a single mom for almost 2 years. And she knows the fear and the confusion that those facing unplanned pregnancies face. But see, as strong and as resilient as she is, she was never meant to be both mother and father. And I thank God that she chose to be stronger than her circumstances, because her daughter at the time, before I came into the picture, whose name is Radiance, by the way, radically and beautifully changed her life. I became Ray Ray's daddy just before she turned 2, and was able to officially adopt her when she turned 5. So she's my girl. That's my girl. All my kiddos from left to right. You see my youngest son, Justice, who's also adopted, my daughter, Leah, my son, Makai, my oldest daughter, Ray Ray. And so this is family. And this is why I'm so passionate about family, because marriage matters. I know we live in a culture and a society that likes to pretend that it doesn't matter, but God created the institution of marriage as detailed in the book of Genesis and throughout Scripture. Hebrews 13:4 says, "Let marriage be held in honor among all, and let the marriage bed be undefiled, for God will judge the sexually immoral and adulterous." God wasn't joking about marriage. He set this up for the model, for the foundation of society. In Matthew 19, Jesus reiterates the definition of marriage between a man and woman, saying, haven't you read the scriptures? They record that from the beginning, God made male and female, made them male and female. And he said, this explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Since they are no longer two, but one, let no one split apart what God has joined together. So marriage throughout Scripture, reiterated. Catholic social teaching, of course, instructs marriage and the family are the central social institutions that must be supported and strengthened, not undermined. Marriage matters, but it didn't matter to one of the largest, most influential cultural forces in American history, Margaret Sanger, the mother of Planned Parenthood. Now, she didn't have exactly a positive view of motherhood. You can see one of her books, Motherhood in Bondage. She didn't see motherhood the same way. In fact, like my mom, she grew up with an alcoholic father, grew up in poverty. But my mom and Margaret Sanger took radically different routes. See, Margaret Sanger saw suffering in a different way. She believed that you eliminate the sufferers, where my mom believed that you elevate the sufferers. So radically different viewpoints. She also had a different sort of notion about marriage. She was married multiple times, and it enabled her to fund her birth control crusade. She married an oil tycoon, Noah Slee, that enabled her to pay for not only Planned Parenthood, but all aspects of her birth control crusade. And I just want to emphasize this too, just so you can understand the mentality of the birth control crusade, since she's the mother of it. This is from her book, Women in the New Race. Because people will often talk about birth control as if it was the movement itself was just some altruistic thing from Margaret Sanger. This is what she says in chapter 18 of her book, Women in the New Race. Birth control itself, often denounced as a violation of natural law, is nothing more or less than the facilitation of the process of weeding out the unfit, of preventing the birth of defectives or of those who will become defectives. Doesn't exactly sound like women's power to me, or women's empowerment. It was such a negative view of humanity. She had a deeply anti-human worldview, which stemmed from her own brokenness that she simply chose never to break out of. She didn't have a positive view of motherhood, didn't have a positive view of fatherhood. And of course, we live in a society today that wants to pretend that dads don't matter, that we can just have any kind of relationship and it's going to be okay for the child. That's not true. The best social emotional, psychological outcomes for children are with two-parent, intact, married two-parent homes with a mother and a father. I write about this often because I can't emphasize it enough. I've worked in inner city schools and inner city outreaches, ministries for years and years, for decades actually, and witnessing firsthand the brokenness of father absence. The toll is devastating on children, and people want to pretend that it doesn't matter. And I'm wondering, what reality are you looking at? The abortion understands the advantage of fatherlessness that they possess because they thrive in communities that are vulnerable. Vulnerable families, those without fathers, are much more susceptible to abortion or to any predatory force for that matter. I remember reading this in the Vatican News. Pope Francis said this about fathers, quote, "Fathers are not born, but made." And just to kind of interject here, it's why part of what we do is trying to teach character development to young men who often don't understand what it means to be a man, and certainly not what it means to be a father, because I believe we have to pour into them. Character matters. But he continues, a man does not become a father simply by bringing a child into the world, amen, but by taking up the responsibility to care for that child. That's why, I will say forever and a day, fathers matter, dads matter. The impact on children is so devastating. I just want to give you a few statistics so you can understand the devastation of father absence. With single female-led homes, and this is not disparaging single parents, my wife was a single parent. I know a lot of single parents do everything they can to raise their children, but in single female-led homes, children are impoverished at rates 5 times higher than those in two-parent married homes. 5 times. Children who grow up in cohabitating situations without the biological father are 8 to 10 times more likely to experience neglect and abuse. That's devastating. Children are 2 times more likely to drop out of high school. In fact, 71% of dropouts are from fatherless families. They're 2 times more likely to commit suicide. Daughters are 4 times more likely to be pregnant in their teens. And here's another statistic that, having worked in these communities and to see the violence that rips through some of these poor communities, which is so heartbreaking to me. The statistical data shows this, that a 1% increase in the proportion of single parent families in a neighborhood is associated with a 3% increase in an adolescent's level of violence. Fathers are a stabilizing force. I don't care how much people want to try to rewrite things, but fathers stabilize. And working in conjunction with the amazing attributes and abilities of a mother, that union, that partnership creates the best environment for children to flourish. And so that's why I'll say forever and a day, dads matter. But when you look at, for instance, in urban communities and Black communities where the fatherlessness rate, if you will, 70 to 71% of children born in homes in Black families are born into homes without fathers. That's shocking. We're talking about an epidemic of fathers. In fact, people want to say, a Black child's biggest risk or biggest threat is racism. No, it's not. It's not the school to prison pipeline, which is overhyped in many ways. It's not climate change. There are 2 things. The biggest threat to a Black child is 1, not being born, and 2, if they are born, not having a father in his or her life. That's the reality. That's why I want to talk about briefly abortion and racism. This is always the easiest topic to talk about, of course, but when you talk about abortion, you can't avoid the conversation about the inherent racism. Eugenics, which is a racist and elitist pseudoscience throughout the 20th century, is what birthed Planned Parenthood. In fact, the same vile pseudoscience of eugenics that birthed the Holocaust birthed Planned Parenthood. I don't have enough time to go into all those particulars, but the pseudoscience was wretched, and yet so many embraced it. But it's the reason why, if you see today, abortion is the #1 killer in the Black community. It outnumbers the top 20 leading causes of death combined. So when people talk about Black Lives Matter, I agree. Yes, Black Lives Matter in and out of the womb. But you're talking about the #1 killer of Black lives. In fact, in New York City, where Planned Parenthood is headquartered, More Black babies have been aborted than born alive. And yet pro-abortion activists call this reproductive justice. They celebrate it as reproductive justice. It's the only demographic that has more induced deaths than births. Not everyone goes along with this. In fact, many of my colleagues, my friends, I have a wonderful colleague in Louisiana, State Senator Katrina Jackson, who has been an author of numerous pro-life bills. And she actually shatters this mainstream media narrative too, that abortion is a white male, or sorry, opposing abortion is a white male Republican issue. No, it's a human issue. And it involves humans of every hue and every background. But she describes abortion this way. Abortion is modern day genocide. Those are heavy words. She's not the only one. But when you can understand the history of Planned Parenthood, you understand the present statistics and the continued targeting, it's not so far-fetched. Let me just show you, this is actually from 300 current and former Planned Parenthood employees who declared this online last summer, something that the pro-life movement has been saying for a long time. It was actually PPGNY, which is Planned Parenthood of Greater New York. This is what they said online, signed by 300 current and former employees, saying Planned Parenthood was founded by a racist white woman that is part of history that cannot be changed. They go on to say, we know that Planned Parenthood has a history and a present steeped in white supremacy. Well, of course they do. They can't change their DNA, no matter how hard they try. But yet they'll do things like this, tweet things like, if you're a Black woman in America, it's statistically safer to have an abortion than to carry a pregnancy to term or give birth. Let me just change the context of this just for a moment. Could you imagine if former President Trump tweeted this? What do you think the reaction would have been? This is junk science. There's nothing medical about this whatsoever. But Planned Parenthood tweets this kind of racist rhetoric, this propaganda, and they get away with it. Now, the current president of Planned Parenthood, Alexis McGill Johnson, wrote in 2019, so about a year and a half ago, she writes this because Planned Parenthood has been defending Margaret Sanger all these years. Doesn't matter how racist her writings were, doesn't matter how racist her actions were, doesn't matter how elitist and just vile her worldview was, particularly the way that she looked down on so many different groups of people, they defended her. And so in 2019, the new president of Planned Parenthood defended Margaret Sanger in Wall Street Journal. But wouldn't you know, just 2 days ago, this is an op-ed in New York Times from that same Planned Parenthood president. I'm the head of Planned Parenthood. We're done making excuses for our founder. As the article goes on to make excuses for the founder. So she doesn't call the founder a racist. She's unwilling to call her a racist. She doesn't cancel the eugenicist, and Planned Parenthood is still killing disproportionately Black lives. In fact, Planned Parenthood kills 318 Black lives every single day. So abortion and racism, you can't talk about it without invoking Planned Parenthood. And I'm not the only one who's doing this. Dr. Alveda King and many of other civil rights leaders and pro-life leaders who have been saying this for years. And to actually see some of these employees catch on, they just don't see the whole picture yet, but they're catching on. But here, the historical figure, you've all have probably heard of her. She was an anti-poverty activist. She was a voting rights activist, Fannie Lou Hamer. And she had no love for Planned Parenthood. In fact, she was forcibly sterilized as a result of the eugenics that Planned Parenthood ushered in. Every state has a eugenics board, and they forcibly sterilized over 60,000 people, taking away their ability to reproduce, to have a child. But Fannie Lou Hamer had this to say about Planned Parenthood. By the way, she was profoundly pro-life. She was an adoptive mama. And she also considered abortion to be genocide in the Black community. But I love that she writes, I'll tell you the next thing that I don't buy. I don't buy distributing birth control pills and legalizing abortion because they're talking about us. If you want to abortionize somebody, do it to yourself, because I'm going to try to keep the children. You're talking about a woman who grew up in a family of over 20. She was, I think, the last one born. She's passionately pro-life, abortion and racism. So this brings me to just how do we fight? How do we fight for family? because in the end, that's really what this comes down to, is fighting for family. The abortion industry understands that when family is dismantled, they have an easier target, they have an easier prey. So how do we fight for family? One of the ways that we did is we do ad campaigns. I talked about the workshops where we try to teach young men how to be men and how to be fathers. We also help raise millions for pregnancy care centers. It's how we fight for family. Pregnancy centers that actually walk mothers and fathers through the pregnancy and for years after the child is born. And they provide hundreds of thousands of free material items, parental training. I mean, it's called Earn While You Learn. There's so much that happens. But one of the things we did too is we tried to call out one of the civil rights organizations that I grew up revering, that I grew up loving, the NAACP. I mean, you're talking Brown v. Board of Education being one of many of the landmark decisions of the NAACP, but I could not understand, how are they partnering with the leading killer of Black lives? How are they actively partnering? How can you say on one hand, Black Lives Matter, and you partner with the leading killer of Black lives? So as a factivist, as a columnist, I decided I was going to write an article about the NAACP's tragic, just willful ignoring of the fatherlessness epidemic in the Black community and their radical pro-abortion advocacy. So I wrote an article that had a title like this. It said the National Association for the Abortion of Colored People. So let me just say, they hated the title, they hated the article, they sued the Radiance Foundation, and they sued me personally. But this is how you fight for family, because I'm not going to back down. Something is true. I know it's a delicate balance of speaking the truth in love, but I'm never going to back down. And, going up against the NAACP was never part of my 5-year plan, my 10-year plan, any year plan. But the irony of, a civil rights organization suing a brown guy for exercising one of my most basic civil rights, free speech. But I will say 2 years in federal court, the battle was surreal, but we won. We were victorious over the NAACP. Sadly, the NAACP still has a radically pro-abortion position and continues to partner with Planned Parenthood. It's the reason why I wrote this book, because I couldn't understand why the civil rights movement had veered away from protecting the most disenfranchised, from ignoring the inherent racism in the abortion industry, and the fact that abortion is the #1 killer of Black lives. So I wrote this book, Not Equal: Civil Rights Gone Wrong. I'm motivated because of one of my childhood inspirations, Frederick Douglass. I don't know if you remember Frederick Douglass, hopefully you do. America wouldn't be America without Frederick Douglass. He was a former slave, an abolitionist, a women's rights activist, or maybe I should call him factivist. He helped to reshape the conscience of President Lincoln. And see, what did he do? Did he just throw his hands up and say, look, the news media is not telling the truth about slavery? Well, what can I do? I'm just a former slave. What can I possibly do? Well, the greatest orator probably of our time decided that he was going to start his own newspaper. And he started the North Star because, news has been fake for as long as it's existed. But he refused to give up. And he said the reason why he started the North Star was this. He says, I see before me a life of toil and trials, but justice must be done. The truth must be told. I cannot be silent. We don't have the luxury of silence when there's injustice happening all around us. Fatherhood begins in the womb. And if we had more men to step up and to be the fathers that they're supposed to be, there would be many women who wouldn't feel the pressure of even having to make that choice. I love the slogan, the masthead slogan from Frederick Douglass on North Star paper. It says this: right is of no sex, truth is of no color, and God is the father of us all. I love that. And just to kind of put things into context, Frederick Douglass was also conceived in rape. The thing is, earthly fathers matter, and the Heavenly Father matters. So that's why I'll keep on talking and celebrating the beauty, the stability, and the empowerment that fathers bring to our society. So with that said, I think we have a little bit of period, a little bit of time to do some Q&A, and would love to answer some of your questions. thank you again, once again, Providence College, for allowing me to share my perspective. Of course, we could go hours into each of these different little pockets, but thank you so much for allowing me the time to share. And right now, I would love to try to answer some of your questions.
Thank you, Ryan, very much. I would like to encourage anyone who would like to ask Ryan Bomberger a question to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. On mine, it's at the far right. It says Q&A. And please feel free to write a question in there, and we will field those questions, Dr. Keating and I, and we will pose them to Ryan. We may not be able to field all of them, but we'll do the best that we can. So Ryan, we've already got a couple here. So I'm going to pose that to you. So Ryan, you spoke about the women who choose to keep their babies, they choose life. There's a question here that asks, what if a woman does choose to have an abortion? Are you saying that they are weak?
Absolutely not. There are so many factors that go into that. Sadly, you've got an abortion industry that's constantly propagandizing women that this is their only choice, that they don't want to face parenthood. They're misinformed on a whole host of things. So no, I'm not suggesting that there's weakness. I mean, it's a crisis situation. And what they need are people who are going to be active healers instead of activist hucksters trying to sell a service. That's why we do partner with pregnancy centers who actually realize this is a traumatic experience for some to go through. And that's why you look at pregnancy centers, many of them are run by women who've been exactly in that same place, who've been exactly where there are women who are executive directors of these centers who are post-abortive. And so they've gone through that. And that's why a lot of pregnancy centers offer post-abortion counseling. So no, I'm not suggesting that they're weak. I'm just suggesting that we as a society should do so much more to come around those facing this crisis with the love and support, whether it's pregnancy centers and maternity homes, we also help to raise a lot of money for as well. But it's not just up to them. It's up to us as a society, one, that we prevent the circumstance from happening in the first place, so we're not even facing the unplanned pregnancy, but when that does happen, that we're loving the individual and we're helping to empower her with life-affirming alternatives.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so the question I have in the chat that I'm going to ask is about same-sex couples, right? One of the issues that comes up, and I'm sure you've thought about it, right, is that there are instances of same-sex couples that are, I'm going a little beyond the question, but maybe to try to get at what I think the questioner is asking, or wants your thoughts on. You often hear when people discuss this matter, and it must obviously be true, that in some instances, a same-sex couple, I know a few, right, are very loving and wonderful parents for adoption, who would adopt. And so, yeah, I mean, in what ways, maybe you could talk a little bit about that, because you have this sort of empirical fact that people are confronted with when they think about that issue, because you say father and a mother. And again, I can only speak for myself, one of my daughter's friends, very loving mothers, and you couldn't make me say that these women were bad parents, right? Short of ideal perhaps, but not bad parents. So yeah, so I'm sure other people have had this experience. So yeah, what would you say about that?
Right, I mean, I do as well. So, the position of the Radiance Foundation is not necessarily to protest gay adoption, if you will, but there's a far bigger picture that we have to look at, because what we're trying to do is promote the ideal. For instance, I don't promote the ideal for me is not the single parent model. Doesn't mean that I'm single parent phobic. It simply means that there are better outcomes for children. And there can be lesbian couples and gay couples who are certainly loving. I'm not denying that at all. It's just if we're looking at the best interest of the child, particularly when it comes to adoption, the majority of studies on parenting show that there are much more positive outcomes in a intact married mother and father home. And that's because women and men bring different sets of abilities, of makeup to a situation. Father, as the stabilizing force on a lot of levels, offers something that two lesbian women don't necessarily offer. And that's why Mark Regnerus has done a lot of great studies on same-sex parenting, and he measures on the 40 different outcomes. And sometimes when you talk about that kind of stuff, it's like, okay, I don't care. I just know these people and I love them and they're wonderful people. I'm not denying any of that. There are lots of wonderful people who are heterosexuals who still may not be able to provide that best situation for the child. So when it comes to adoption, often many of these children are coming from brokenness and incredible dysfunction. And so as a society, we should not be afraid to say, okay, here is the ideal situation. The bigger picture for me, though, and the really problematic part for me, is how LGBT activism have taken this from beyond we should be able to adopt to where they're now shutting down faith-based adoption agencies that believe that a child is best, the child's best interest is served with a married two-parent home with a mother and a father. So they've shut down Catholic services. They shut down Bethany Christian Services in Philadelphia. Of course, Bethany Christian Services then completely capitulated, but they're trying to shut down faith-based adoption agencies. Not only that, they're making it impossible for prospective families in Illinois, in New York, and in several states, and with the Equality Act, it would make it nationwide. If you're a family or prospective couple who does not affirm homosexuality, you are no longer an eligible foster parent or an adoptive parent. So now we've gone beyond because it's not even the issue where there aren't agencies that won't place a child in a same-sex home. It's now these major LGBT organizations, Lambda Legal Foundation, you've got Human Rights Campaign, of course, the ACLU, that are aggressively and actively trying to shut down faith-based adoption agencies. So my question is that in the best interest of the child? Who is that serving? Adoption does not exist to serve special interests. It exists to serve the child. And so, I mean, I could list off a number of studies that show the different outcomes and some of the significant differences in the outcomes for children in same-sex homes versus heterosexual married intact homes. And they're worthwhile. In fact, maybe at the end of this, I can give a link to our site that will list some of those studies that people can look at those and see that there is a significant difference, and they can come to their own reasoned conclusion. But it's a great question to ask. My issue with fellow Christians, whether Catholic or Protestant, is that if you're going to oppose same-sex adoption, then you should play a role in embracing or encouraging a culture of adoption. And that doesn't mean everybody has to be an adoptive parent. That's not what I'm saying. But there has to be more. Like, for instance, in foster care system, half the children who are available for adoption, 110,000 about in the last reported year, about half of them are adopted. The other half are not. There's really no reason for that. And just to go to somebody who may ask this question, the solution is not gay parents, because there aren't enough gay couples, gay individuals who are available and or willing to adopt. They, since 2015, since a Supreme Court ruling, you would think that it would have completely erased these roles, because people said, well, if more gay individuals could adopt, it would change that whole thing. It didn't. I mean, statistically, it didn't even really put a dent in the children who are still waiting for adoption. But there are a lot of dynamics to that question. I'm sorry, it's a really long-winded response, but there are a lot of dynamics to that question that we have to wrestle with when it comes to the best interest of the child in adoption and the type of parenting.
Thank you, Ryan, very much. I have another question for you. What would you recommend as actions that we might take to combat this epidemic of fatherlessness, these fatherless households, maybe for both men and for women? What measures might we take?
Well, we have to understand that the government is a horrible substitute for a father. That's first and foremost. So our social policies, I mean, you look at the war on poverty in the 60s, and I mean, you're looking at, I think in 1940, it was about 4% of Black homes were fatherless. And then in the 60s, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was sounding the alarm as a politician, saying that there was a out of wedlock birth rate, that's what the phraseology was used, was 25%. And now we're looking at 70%. So the government has constantly injected itself as if it's some sort of great replacement for a father. They're not. So part of it is advocating for social policies that strengthen families, not dissolve families. And that's a huge part of it. This is not some anti-welfare screed. In fact, I'm very supportive of temporary, that's what it's called, temporary assistance for needy families. I'm an advocate for that temporary assistance, but what happens is it becomes generational and perpetual. And so part of what we can do in changing this epidemic of fatherlessness is really encourage what prevents the fatherlessness. And that's a culture that, I mean, people don't like to hear this, but we're in a culture where it's like, hey, it doesn't matter. Sexuality and sexual behavior doesn't matter. It does matter. Obviously, we see the repercussions of reckless sexuality. And this is women and men, because obviously it takes two to make all that happen. But if we're encouraging people, I know people don't like to hear about abstinence. People don't like to hear about restraint. They don't like to hear, I have 4 kids. No one wants to be told not to do something. That's just our nature. But the reality is, if we don't encourage that kind of restraint, we're going to continue to have this epidemic that's increasing. I mean, we look at abortion, 86% of women seeking abortions are unmarried. So this is really predicated on a massive level of abandonment. And so part of what we do is, in some of the organizations that we work with, build up young men to, character development and having them understand what it means to achieve a dream, because sometimes you have to give up certain things to achieve that dream. It's encouraging that. It's encouraging women to want to aspire, young women to want to aspire toward more. But if we don't start encouraging the stuff that's preemptive, it's kind of hard to come back around and fix some of that brokenness later on. The other part that I really want to encourage is churches talk more about these issues. You have churches now are stepping up and being very supportive of single moms. I love that. But they also need to step up and teach young people what it means to be responsible. What are the consequences to our actions? And I think that would go a long way. This is part of what the mainstream culture is obviously not teaching young people. It's basically do whatever you want to do. It's the whole free love thing. And that doesn't work out so well. But I think if we address it from a social policy standpoint, we address it from a cultural and spiritual standpoint, that we will strengthen our society, because people have a better understanding and the meaning of why family matters, why marriage matters more.
Ryan, perhaps briefly, I'm going to just intervene there and say, how do you build up young men? I noticed that you have one of the presentations you give is called Men by Design. And it seems to me you have a vocabulary for talking to men about men. How do you build up young men?
I've been involved in several programs that involve with young men, broken chains. I mean, part of it is spending that time, because you're talking about a lot of kids who have a lot of alone time, particularly those who are fatherless, who are trying to navigate the world on their own. And so part of it is teaching them about their worth and their value, teaching them about the beautiful benefits of achieving this goal and achieving that goal, and even instilling in them that having a goal is a beautiful thing. It's actually heartbreaking how many young men don't even have a vision for their lives. And so part of that is really talking through with these, because a lot of times they don't have those kind of conversations with their friends. They don't have the support system in their home to actually engage in those kinds of conversations. So part of that is that we also, one of the organizations that I love is called Men of Iron, and it's a church-based mentoring program for young men to understand who they are, particularly from a biblical standpoint, but to also understand what their role is in so many different facets in our society. So I encourage all kinds of programs like that. And quite honestly, I was a mentor in college for a big brother, big sister. This is something college students can do right now. You see so many young kids who are written off as hopeless, that, you know, their situation is desperate. Well, then step in, be a mentor. I mean, take an hour or two a week and pour into that kid. And I'm telling you, you will begin to understand how you can help reshape and redirect that trajectory as a mentor.
Thank you. That's great. Oh, you mentioned the issue of color blindness, and someone asked this question, and I'm intrigued by your answer because, of course, when most people say I don't see color, what they mean is I don't hold it against or for anyone of their, you know, what color they are, which obviously is a morally proper position, right? But at the same time, you know, you made the argument, and I think, you know, I think it's very captivating that actually, if you don't see color or ethnicity or sex or gender, you know, all these other things, you're not really seeing the person, right? And you have to build a community made of persons, right? Because you got to get to know a person, learn their own story and their location and all that kind of thing. But at the same time, the reason why people, you know, want to say something like that is because it seems that we've made race, and you sort of touched on this, and ethnicity, if you include certain ethnicities, into the defining characteristic of a person, even to the point that people can't even deal with one another cross-racially, which of course is poison. It's total poison. Yes. Yeah, so maybe you could talk on that. You've probably thought quite a bit about it.
I live it. I live it all the time. I mean, this to me is so tragic. We're actually in this place in 2021 where the complete reversal of MLK's admonition to look at character over color has been reversed. So it's color before character. It's color before everything right now. And that's so destructive. I mean, I know that some people mean well, particularly when they want to fight what they perceive as racism, but you can't fight racism, or you can't fight prejudice with more prejudice. And it's exactly what happens when you deduce who and what a person is simply by their outer complexion. You've committed an act of prejudice. You can't possibly know somebody by the hue of their skin. And so, of course, I'm not advocating looking past all these things. We are these things. It's part of what makes us who we are. Our gender, obviously, our ethnicity, our color, our experiences, all those things. But wow, we live in a culture right now that is so fixated by color to the point where it's so polarizing that the assumption is, well, it's the whole critical race theory thing, where apparently people are only divided into two groups, the oppressed and the oppressors. Well, that's a depressing and nihilistic way of looking at life. And what am I, as someone who's biracial? Am I both an oppressor and the oppressed? I mean, that's why I advocate that as a Christian, I advocate that if our identity isn't first deeply rooted in Christ, it will be uprooted by everything else. And this is what we're experiencing in our culture today, because our identity is fixated on the temporal, on things that change. And for people like myself and my children, at least 3 of my children, who are multiracial, where should their identity lie? Well, I want it to lie in something that's fixed, because it's not going to be the hue of their skin. And the hue of their skin is going to tell somebody their moral convictions, their political worldview, or anything else about their makeup. And so that's why I'm a staunch advocate for the fact that character matters far more than color. Don't ignore the color. It's part of the makeup, but character transcends color in every situation. And it's how we better address issues of racism, is because we then see the person as a human being made in the image of God with equal and irrevocable worth first, before the other attributes. And that's how I think we can approach the situation more lovingly.
Thanks, Ryan. I have a question here that would like you to talk a little bit more about the attributes of good fathers. Now, of course, you said things in your talk: a father stabilizes, things of that nature. You talked about the devastating effects of the absence of a father. Say a little bit more about the attributes of a good father and the sort of influence that can have.
Oh yeah, a loving father. Of course, that can be subjective to people. What is loving? I had a dad who had 13 kids, and yet he was present for us in so many different ways. And it's not easy to be present with 13 kids. That's a difficult task. I mean, you can have 2 kids, and that's a difficult task for a father. But a father must be present, must be involved. I mean, that's why some of the metrics and some of these studies talk about, the percentage of time that fathers spend eating with their children, reading to their children, playing with their children. These, especially in those early years, is so formative. This is so crucial in developing a healthy child on so many levels. So as a father of 4 who has a very busy schedule, first of all, my family is first. Like for me, first of all, it's faith and family, because the reason why I believe that family is so important is because of my faith. So even though I have a crazy schedule, I travel around the world and I do all these events, but that's secondary to my family. So I will always sacrifice for my family. And as I grew up, my dad obviously had to sacrifice things. He wanted to sail, and he loved boating, but with 13 kids, you have to put some things on the back burner. And that's what happens. But we live in a culture today it's so narcissistic. I gotta, self-care, I gotta take care of me. Now, to an extent, obviously, you have to take care of yourself in that you can't die, or you're obviously not a good father. But you have to understand that there is a level of self-sacrifice that happens. And for me, I will spend time with my kids. Even though I may have wanted to do this thing or that thing, I need to spend that time with those kids. I need to read with my kids. I need to talk to them and find out, how's your day been? I mean, a lot of fathers, sometimes we get home now I work from home and we travel a lot, so I don't have the office situation. But sometimes we get home from work and you just want to disconnect and slump down. But a good father is one that is always trying to be that present father, always trying to be that good listener, not always trying to solve everything like that, because that's what guys we tend to do, but listening. I have a 16-year-old daughter. I got to listen to my daughter. I don't know how many have 16-year-old girls. And Ray Radiance is amazing. She's an amazing 16-year-old, but I want her to understand that I care about what she's going through. And she knows that by the way that I listen to her and the way that the conversation goes. So that, for me, those are some of those things that fathers do in being present, being loving, being devoted, that makes them that stabilizing force.
I'm particularly touched by that, but she knows by the way you listen to her. I think that was beautiful. Jim.
Okay, this is our final question, but it's been asked a number of times in different ways, which surprises me a little bit, but obviously people want to hear what you have to say on this matter. But abortion, right? You're obviously a pro-life guy.
Right.
Can you make, what's your argument for why people should consider abortion is something that ought to be avoided at all costs, obviously. So yeah, as I said, it seems obvious to me what you're going to say, but I guess people want to hear it, so I want to hear it as well.
Sure. Well, abortion is the intentional killing of an innocent human life. And so as someone who is brown, who is the beneficiary of the abolitionist movement that erased the institution of slavery from our country, I can't help but see that shift of denying personhood to people of my complexion has moved to another people group, to the unborn, to the most defenseless. So for me, I see that as a continuum. And that's why I see it as the injustice that it is. Every human being is a person, every person is a human being. So that for me is why, and especially as someone who was adopted, someone who was rescued from the violence of abortion, someone who has 2 adopted children, and my youngest son particularly also rescued from abortion, I can't help but feel moved to rescuing the most defenseless. And that doesn't just include the unborn, because I abhor the exploitation of women by the abortion industry. The abortion industry profits, you're talking Planned Parenthood, for instance, is $2.3 billion organization. They're not doing this out of charity. They're not doing this out of, benevolence. It makes them incredibly wealthy, which is why they miseducate women all the time. It's why they fight every women's right to know bill. I think women should have the right to know all the physiological and psychological consequences of abortion. Why does the abortion industry fight it? I want women to know that when they go to Planned Parenthood, if they choose parenthood, you don't have support from Planned Parenthood. They're not teaching parenting classes. They don't have baby boutiques and mama boutiques that provide the hundreds of thousands of items and support, not to mention the classes and the life skills classes that they often get at pregnancy centers. So there are a lot of different reasons why I want to fight the injustice of abortion. But when you look at the destruction, the intentional destruction of human life and the exploitation of women and the elimination of fathers, I'm sold. This is why I will fight the injustice of abortion. I'll still love those who are post-abortive. Of course I will. I'm going to love them, but I'm going to keep exposing a predatory industry that profits from fear and confusion.
That was excellent.
Yeah, thanks very much, Ryan. I'd like to just follow up with that very quickly by asking you to comment a little bit more on, you said Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry benefits from dismantling the family. I thought that was a very interesting thing to say. Could you say more about that?
Well, that's the model that Planned Parenthood relies on. It's why they never advocate for families. The only family they actually advocate for are gay families. They're not advocating for intact married families. In fact, anytime they ever talk about marriage, it's about gay marriage. There's a reason for that. They don't prosper where there are strong families. As I mentioned before, young girls are 4 times more likely to experience an abortion in fatherless families. 4 times. Planned Parenthood knows this. And so this is why they depend on fathers not being in home. It's also why Planned Parenthood, people have to understand, they spend, over $200 million on advocacy, lobbying, and lobbying and advertising. They push for legislation, particularly for entitlement programs and other programs that actually perpetuate the single parent model. They understand their demographic, they understand their client base, and they want to continue that client base. So there are a lot of things that Planned Parenthood does that actually discourage young men. Plus they don't want men involved at all. In fact, it's the whole no uterus, no say, which is interesting to me because 7 males in the Supreme Court are what brought us Roe v. Wade and Doe v. Bolton. So, Planned Parenthood loves when pro-choice men speak up for abortion, but they want men who actually oppose abortion to be silent. So this is what I've dealt with. And even in our organization, they've come against us in our organization. They put out a documentary called A Vital Service, which I call a crockumentary because it's just 20 minutes of sheer propaganda. I'll use that word, propaganda, in establishing how great Planned Parenthood is, despite the fact that they actively dismantle. They literally dismember the unborn and they dismantle families. I don't know how else to say this. They are not advocates of fatherhood because they know that fatherhood cuts into their bottom line.
This is truly the last question, but
Okay.
You said something that I don't think I've ever heard anyone say before, and so I'd like you to maybe sum up things with it, which is the idea of to eliminate the sufferers, right? This is something that is deeply Christian, which is that suffering is redemptive, right? Even for the sufferer, but also for those who encounter, at least in a loving way, and can conform themselves with the suffering, because we are called to conform ourselves with the crucified and suffering Christ. And that's something that is in some ways very foreign and alien to our culture, which suffers, very little, at least of us, we suffer very little in a way. So yeah, maybe you could say something, because I just found that very profound and provocative.
Well, having grown up in the family that I had, I've seen how brokenness was restored. I mean, this is what adoption does in the natural and the supernatural. It brings healing and restoration. So I've lived this. I've seen the restoration. I've seen that healing from the suffering, and I've seen the way that my parents loved the sufferers, the children they brought into their family. The thing is, it's kind of like when we watch a movie and we're rooting for that underdog. We see someone who overcomes a seemingly impossible. Why are we so moved? Why is our heart just want to get up and rejoice? It's because that's how we're wired. I mean, Proverbs 31:8-9 says, be a voice for the voiceless, speak up for those being crushed, ensure justice for those who are being denied justice. This is the calling of Christians. But what we don't understand is that adversity that we go through makes us better human beings. I have siblings who have physical disabilities, and I have godbrothers and godsisters who are Down syndrome, who are blind. And I have seen, people will just write them off and they'd be better off dead. No, they aren't. They're not better off dead, and the world isn't better off dead without them. We learn so much from struggle. We learn so much when we actually pour ourselves in to help alleviate somebody else's struggle. So when people say, someone shouldn't be born into poverty. Well, guess what? Greatness has arisen out of poverty. Look at Dr. Ben Carson. He had a single mom, and he and his brother, his mom was like, you're not going to be statistics. Dr. Ben Carson didn't want to read, but his mom's like, oh, you're going to read. And he became a world-renowned pediatric neurosurgeon. But yet people would look at that and say, oh, well, no single mom should have to go through that. That child shouldn't have to face the difficulty of poverty. And yet greatness arises out of poverty all the time. We have so many situations. Oprah Winfrey is another perfect example. Grew up sadly, she's pro-abortion, but she grew up in poverty, grew up as one of those situations where people say, well, I'd understand that person shouldn't have to go through that. But this is the beauty of suffering. And I say that not for people to misunderstand, like we want people to suffer. No, you don't want people to suffer. But suffering has such an amazing impact on both the sufferer and those who have poured their lives into elevating that sufferer. So that's why, as a Christian, I'm going to keep pouring my life into the most defenseless, the most marginalized, the most defenseless, because for me, that is my act of worship. That's my act of love. I'm going to keep on loving the broken so that they can experience breakthrough.
Ryan, thank you so much. We've really enjoyed your presentation. Speaking for myself, I was profoundly moved by it. Some of the comments we've gotten indicate the same thing. You're a gift. Thank God you're here, and thank God for your witness. And thank you so much for this seminar. God
Thank you for those who came. I hope.
And thanks to all those of you who are here, who came, who listened. All right. Have a great evening, everybody.
All right. God bless.
God bless.